when you're doing a data migration, what are the steps that you use when you're mapping configuration data in a project?
That's a good question. So first of all, the whole concept of integrating the configuration back into the data migration is quite novel, and it's a very powerful aspect of what we do. So we've been doing this for about 12 years. Now, the mismatch between the configuration in a target system and what you may have mapped some of those reference values to will cause load failures. And that's one of the primary premises that we try to avoid. So what we do, and it depends on which target system it is, of course, but generally we're pulling via APIs each individual reference list that we need, and we actually store them within our tool sets. And then from there, we actually introduce them into one of our primary tools, our translation-o-matic tool, our translation tool. And that's to be driven by a customer, obviously with the bells and whistles of auto matching and all that kind of stuff. But primarily, it's driven by a customer. And it has the in values, which are coming from the legacy system, and then it will actually present the out values to be mapped against. And some of them are quite complex. Some of them could have multiple values. You could have 3, 4, 5 different out values that are coming from various different references. And you can even apply cascading and things like that, which we do. So they do get quite complicated, but from a user's perspective, there's simple drop-down boxes, there's auto matching, there's all this kinds of stuff, depending on what they are. A lot of them are just one-to-one mappings. So that's how we tie in the configuration in the new target system and map it against the older references in the old system, because we're pulling all the old references out as part of the extraction. We know what they are. We then want to map them against the possible new values, and by having that whole holistic end-to-end solution, you end up with an interesting paradigm, because in some cases even the customer will come to map those values and find that they're missing. Well, what does that tell you? It tells you it's not in the config, of course. So then that means that then you can fill in and drive and even test your configuration through this process. So it's really quite an interesting thing that we've got going here in terms of how we're utilizing that old config. But at the end of the day, it means that you've got a very, very clean and accurate and complete set of reference mappings.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So you're connecting to the live data to actually pull the config out from the target system. What happens if that changes? What happens if the customer changes it after it's been mapped?
So that's a good point, and yes, you do get that. Obviously, over time, it should get less and less, as you would imagine. The config should start to get locked down, but you can't guarantee it's going to do that. And we've seen instances, and it does happen, unfortunately, more often than not, where even after the configuration's supposedly locked down and you're going into your final UAT cycles, user acceptance testing, and then you end up with a situation where people have realized they need to go and change something, and they add a bit more config in, and you end up with slightly different values getting added, and this does happen. So the way we approach that is every time our system runs, and remember it's fully automated, it runs every single night, and it runs every time we want to do, say, a trial or whatever, we'll force it to run then specifically for that event. So it's running lots and lots of times, but every time it runs, i.e. every night in its auto mode, then it will go and draw those values again from that target system, and it will check them. So it'll pull them in, it'll know the new list, it'll then compare it against the list that was already mapped against. And if it finds a value that's no longer valid because it's no longer in the config anymore, then it will highlight that, and it will actually data quality issue it for you, for the customer, and it'll show them exactly where it's gone, and it'll show them exactly what they need to then go and remap. So it leads the customer straight back to that now unvalid mapping, and then they can obviously go and put a valid value in. And what it will also do is, through our standard data quality checking, it will also it'll exclude those records that are mapped against that you know, that not valid anymore mapping, it'll actually exclude them. It'll tell you that it's done it, but it'll exclude it because it has to do. Because if it doesn't, it's going to break anyway, right? So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that it's valid data that's going to load. It's never going to break that load process, because we cannot allow going into a go live situation where it's going to start falling over because some references are mapped wrong. We can't allow that, because that means that the entire go live could be now in jeopardy. You're going into the unknown, and you know what? Data migration, we don't want to be going into the unknown. We want to have a predictable, a guaranteed outcome, and that's why we're so successful, I guess.